Sell off the Israel bonds! Sell off the Israel bonds! Long live Palestine! Long live Palestine! No Israel bonds! No Israel bonds!
What it means to be a best friend forever, a BFF. We keep hearing that the United States and Israel are best friends forever, and to me that implies that we have a certain mutually respectful relationship with each other. But then when I look at what the behavior of Israel is with relation to the United States, I don't see that. And so I want to talk about a few aspects of that. The first is American citizens who have been murdered by the Israeli Defense Force or by settlers in Israel. This is the 20th anniversary of the murder of Rachel Corrie, who is an activist in Gaza trying to protect people's homes. And she was run over intentionally by an IDF, Israeli Defense Force bulldozer, and killed. 19 years later, after her family received no cooperation with the United States or Israel in investigating her death and coming to some conclusion of what happened, the Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was covering an Israeli Defense Force raid in Jenin in the West Bank. She was shot by the Israeli Defense Force and killed. There were several independent investigations, including a very conclusive one by CNN, that showed that the Israelis killed her, but the Israelis denied it. The Americans said, oh, it looked like it was really a terrible accident, and we're sorry it happened, but they refused to investigate. After several months of pressure from Shireen's family, the U.S. actually had the FBI start to investigate it or put them on the case, and in response to that, Benny Gantz, who was the Israeli defense minister at the time, said they're interfering in Israeli affairs, that our best friend there didn't want us to be investigating the death of one of our citizens. Let's talk about visitors to Israel and to Palestine. Rashida Tlaib, a congresswoman from Detroit, Palestinian-American congresswoman, was not allowed entry into Israel. Countless Americans have also been denied entry. Two recent visitors from Connecticut, a 16-year-old girl and a 20-year-old girl from Connecticut, were denied entry because their family has Syrian ancestry. And yet, the Israelis are trying to get become members of the visa waiver program so that citizens of Israel can come to the United States without having to get a visa. And one wonders how can they be refusing American entry to Israel and yet saying they want Israelis to be able to come to the United States with no need for a visa. And then finally, let's talk about what's going on with the Supreme Court, the attempts to change it so that the Supreme Court has far less power in Israel. And in response to that, and all the protests that are going on in Israel that you've all heard about, our Secretary of State Antony Blinken suggested, very meekly I should say, that Israel should tap the brakes on this and perhaps come up with a compromise. And in response to that, the Diaspora Affairs Minister of Israel, Amichai Chikli, said, "You pump the brakes, mind your own business." This is what he said to Antony Blinken. And then the final thing I'd like to talk about are the settlements and the Israeli reaction to American policy on the settlement, which has always been against having settlements. Hours after 5 of its major allies, Germany, France, the US, Italy, and the UK, issued a joint statement against the Israeli settlement activity, the Higher Planning Council for Judea and Samaria, which is the Israeli names for the West Bank, said that it intended to advance building new projects. So once again, our best friend forever is doing exactly what we don't want them to do, and is not consulting with us at all, not hearing us out at all. There's legislation There has been legislation, laws for years in the U.S. One of them is called the Leahy Law that prevents, it basically prevents U.S. government funds for being used for assistance to units of foreign security forces where there's credible information implicating those forces in the commission of gross human rights violations. We have credible information that those violations are being committed. Very highly respected international organizations, Amnesty International, the Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem, have all issued reports that document that Israel is guilty of crimes of apartheid, and yet the United States continues to send the aid, even though its own law says that it shouldn't be sent. And finally, here in Connecticut, we have environmental, social, and governance guidelines of for the Connecticut retirement plans and trust funds, which say that there have to be environmental, social, and governance factors applied to any Connecticut investments. Connecticut has $10 million of investments in Israeli bonds, and those guidelines should be applied. And what we're all here to say is that Connecticut needs to divest of those Israeli investments because they violate state policy. Thank you.
This is the treasurer.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was inspired to send an email to the State Treasurer, Eric Russell, and I showed my letter around, and I'm honored that I was asked to read it at this rally. Dear State Treasurer Russell, I'm a Jewish resident of New Haven who implores you to do what you can to have the state of Connecticut divest its holdings in Israel bonds. In the 1980s, I was part of the anti-apartheid struggle and an activist for the rights of Black South Africans. I argued then for the state of Connecticut to divest from companies doing business in South Africa, and to its credit, it did. It's long overdue for Connecticut to divest from Israel. Israel is not a democratic country. Palestinians are second-class citizens. Settlers are forcing Palestinians out of their homes and off their land. The current Israeli government is intent on denying rights to Jews who are not followers of the Orthodox religious laws. I'm sure you're aware of this because it's in the mainstream press. I abhor all the killings. The discrepancy in the numbers of the dead is telling. Deaths of Palestinians are 7 times the deaths of Israelis. Palestinians are fighting for their homes, and the Israeli government is encouraging settlers to drive them out. Today is March 16th, the 20th anniversary of the death of Rachel Corrie, a 23-year-old American who was crushed by an Israeli Defense Forces bulldozer as she and others protested and tried to prevent the demolition of a Palestinian home. This May will be the 1-year anniversary of the killing of Palestinian American Shireen Abu Akleh by an Israeli soldier. Abu Akleh was reporting on an Israeli raid at the Jenin refugee camp. Less well publicized is the death of Palestinian American Omar Assad on January 12, 2022. Reports differ whether he was 78 or 80 years old. When he was driving home at night, he was stopped by Israeli military at a checkpoint in the Palestinian village Jaliyah. He was beaten, gagged, and handcuffed. He had a heart attack from the stress and died. Autopsy showed there were bruises on his head and redness on his wrists where he was handcuffed. These are American citizens, and the U.S. has not held Israel accountable for their deaths. Now that Israel has a blatant right-wing aggressive government that is trampling on the democratic rights of Israeli Jews, many people are starting to wake up to its nature and are beginning to understand what the Palestinians have been going through all these years. In the name of justice and humanity, start the dialogue to divest from Israel bonds. Stop supporting the Israeli government and its genocide of the Palestinians. I am an American Jew. The state of Israel often says it speaks for all Jews. Rest assured it doesn't. There are many Jews like me who believe in human rights for all, including for the Palestinians who need their land, their economy, and their culture to be respected internationally. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely, Paula Panzarella.
So you just heard about Rachel Corrie. I just want to read her last email to her family the night before she died. She wrote, she wrote this from Gaza. I couldn't even believe that a place like this existed. But even more, can you believe there are children here? Forget the fear. They tell me that at night. Forget the fear. I am ashamed that I am scared for my own body and dying anonymously inside a house in one of the most populous places on earth, where children die as martyrs of the occupation, which we pay for quietly without ever knowing their names. We need more people. I love you, Rachel.
We picked this building because the Treasury is in here, or the offices of the Treasury and of the Treasurer, the new one, Eric Russell. We've been writing to him. He ran for the position this November and was elected. In the candidacy, in the run-up, we wrote to all the candidates for treasurer and asked them what their position was about Israel bonds and Israel investments. None of them wrote back. Eric Russell didn't write back. So, after Hawara was burned, I wrote to Eric Russell again, and again there was no answer. We're a constituent, we live in this state. I, as a retired teacher, have money that he's investing, $10 million in Israel bonds, and another $100 million in all kinds of other investments. We got in Israel. We got listings of them. All sorts of things. Companies involved in intelligence and spying. And the big one, Elbit. It's the biggest military company in Israel. So we make investments in that too. And it's dead wrong. Eric Russell should get that money pulled out. Take that money off. It's employee money. It's not his money. It's been state employees and teachers and paraprofessionals and all kinds of people who work for the state or city governments. Their money is holed up in here or wherever it's physically kept. And then it's gone out in investments. Enormous amounts of money. Why should it be going to Israel? A state that is so vicious, so racist, that commits the international crime of apartheid. There are some laws about where you can invest. Iran is on the bad list. Sudan is on the bad list. South Africa years ago was put on the bad list. Why not Israel?
That's right.
But we don't have to wait for a law. They can use their own understanding of what is a good investment, what is an ethical investment, and what is a risky investment. Now that's something that has to be brought up, that lots of people are taking their money out or threatening to do that. Just this week, 200 Jewish businessmen from the United States wrote a letter and said, because of all the turmoil, because of the procedure that they're going to gut their Supreme Court, they're going to become lawless for business. Forget about Palestinians. The greater sin, lawless for business. So they are talking about taking their money out. And some Israelis already have taken their money out. One firm has taken out $500 million, has divested. And you know, when we were talking about BDS, we've been talking about it for years, you know, don't use this brand of hummus, or, you know, this thing or that thing, small things, and they would get hysterical. This is, you know, an existential threat to Israel. This is economic terrorism. And that's all small potatoes to what's being talked about now from the Jewish businessmen in the United States or from Israelis. Don't want their money lost. That's BDS too, in a big way. Anyway, we're here, 15, however many we are, and we're telling the treasurer here and other members on the investment committee of the Treasury that are taking deferred money from state and city employees to stop investing in apartheid. One thing we said to people, contact the treasurer, and Shelley came up with a chant at the last demonstration. I don't know if I have the rhythm, but state.treasurer@ct.gov. Gonna do that? State.treasurer@ct.gov. 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 And when you send that email, that's the address, all you have to do is a 5-word message. Sell off the Israel bonds. Sell off the Israel bonds. Sell off the Israel bonds.